You know, the familiar sayings like, you can't cross the same river twice, or, no two snowflakes are alike. But I think we tend to hear those or understand those in terms of as saying something about rivers or snowflakes rather than about just life, like about you. You can't do anything twice, or nothing, no two things are alike. It's what's cool about this coastline paradox. It's like even before you cross the river, um, you can't even really define when do you begin to cross the river. That crossing point is always an invention as much as a discovery. That action within that configuration is always a unique thing. As Ammons puts it, tomorrow a new walk is a new walk. And what's interesting about that formulation, that so you can take the literal meaning of it, but it's kind of contradicted by its redundancy, right? Like the redundancy of the formulation says, actually suggests that no, it's the same walk. A new walk is a new walk. It's he's that's an expression of an equality of sameness, identity, rather than difference. So what's interesting there, I think what's going on like in the Borges stories is that it's drawing your attention out of the function of language to hold things still, secure a certain structure of meaning within the syntax of a sentence, and highlight instead the moment of reading, the specificity of the moment of reading. Tomorrow a new walk is a new walk. That's reading, that is telling you something about newness. The experience of reading it, like in the Book of Sand, that you can't read the same page twice. It's a reading itself is always a new act, even if it's the same. Even if you're just reading the same thing over and over, it's each moment of reading, the action of reading is itself practically demonstrating newness. So why is this difficult to understand? Humans have a bias, have an essentialist bias, no doubt for powerful evolutionary reasons, especially for a predator to have this essentialist bias to say things are defined by an inner essence, what a thing is. And so we learn about the environment by discovering and defining these essences. Hence, I like these little diminutive miniature Ammons poems, the ones we looked at before. Like they're about digressions, Corson's Inlet, and expressions of sea level, but they're sort of trying to track digression in a positive way through his lines. The way in which his poetry breaks syntax, maps a kind of flow and digression. These miniature poems, again, are more about the act of reading them. A day without rain is like a day without sunshine. I think the syntax here says so little that it actually makes us alive to the distinctness of actual days, of actual weather, of weathering as like an activity that's irreducible to any syntactical construction. Likewise, the reeds give way to the wind and give the wind away. Language constructs that serve to highlight, I think, the inadequacy of language to summarize our experience of nature, but experience in general. Because it's just about relationship, right? The reeds give way to the wind or give the wind away. The, the causality is reversed. The agency, who's the agent and who's the object of the action. A third way of reading this poem that I think is cool, give the wind away. I think you can read that away if you read it in terms of sound, and it's a poem about, there's a sonic, obvious referent to the poem. give the wind away. The wind needs a object in order to be wind, right? Like there's no what's wind in a vacuum? It's nothing. Wind is wind by virtue of impacting on things. So the reeds give the wind a way to be wind. Considering the poem Weathering in terms of sound is revealing too. Weather. So weathering, is it about weather, what happens outside, or is it about weather, rain, or sunshine? Right? Like, is it the syntactical function of the either or, weather, rain, or sunshine? Or is it weathering, as in what happens outside? I think these lines foreground the act of reading, the moment, the performance in a way, in a kind of musical way. The wind in the reeds sort of is casting nature as a musical performance, sort of reminding us of language as music, as performance, as sonic performance, like birdsong. And likewise, this concluding couplet of Wordsworth's Daffodils, about, first and foremost, it's really about its rhythm and rhyme scheme. It's acting out the dancing that it's describing. And that's all the dancing is this rhyme scheme. The bare bones minimalism of these poems becomes maximalist in the sense that as the semantic content disappears into nothingness, the act of reading fills that place, and now you realize, oh my God, it's all about the experience of reading, which is to say, everything right now, here and now, that I'm experiencing is teaching me what it means for the reeds to give the wind away, for the heart with pleasure to fill and dance with daffodils. It's the experience of now being in the environment, and the kind of rich, unique patterning that is every moment of experience. I think this is what Ammons describes in terms of the sharpness of a line spread out. By transitions, the land falls from grassy dunes to creek to under creek, but there are no lines, though change in that transition is clear as any sharpness. But sharpness spread out, allowed to occur over a wider range than mental lines can keep. This reminds me of what Glick has to say about the famous quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger, has to say about biology. So amazing. Pattern born amid formlessness. This is biology's basic beauty and basic mystery. Life sucks order from a sea of disorder. You know, think about the emergence of organic life from inorganic. It's an introduction of a new order of complexity, right? Metabolism, organic structures, metabolizing energy. Life sucks order from a sea of disorder. A living organism has the astonishing gift of concentrating a stream of order on itself, and thus escaping the decay into atomic chaos. I love how he echoes Coleridge's Ministry of Frost, his description of aperiodic crystals. He's describing nothing but dance, nothing but poetry. The uniqueness of each snowflake, the uniqueness of each frost crystal. It's a sensitive dependence on initial conditions. Like a dance, the snowflake forms by following physical rules, but in response to unpredictable disturbances in the atmosphere. So, like an organic structure, like a plant, like a growing animal, it has a kind of programmed algorithm. But this is playing out context of unpredictable accidents and developing a structure that's unforeseeable but deterministic, necessary. Also, I think that's a good way of describing poetry or dance. It has a formal structure that's unpredictable, that happens, that you can only know in the performance. What music is what music does at one particular place in time. But there's a determinism to it. You're recognizing in your experience of the music or the poetry or dance, again, I think it's just what all these words mean, is experience of coherence over time. What Wallace Stevens says here, the squirming facts exceed the squamous mind, if one may say so. So there's too much. The world is chaotic for our literal-minded understanding of things. And yet, nonetheless, relation appears, a small relation expanding like the shade of a cloud on sand, a shape on the side of a hill. Being in the environment is like, being in the midst of this music or this dance. Unfolding patterns. Hence these wonderful exuberance in this passage of Tom Stoppard's play, Arcadia. Enchanting recognition of the reality of chaotic patterns that is unpredictable but deterministic. From the perspective of predicting the future, totally random. But once they play out, it's totally deterministic. It had to play out that way. It assumes this, fractal pattern or, snowflake pattern or whatever. And that's another way of describing poetry or dance. The experience of then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. It's different every single time I read it, just like every breath is different. But it accords with a necessary pattern of life that is my life, that is my existence. It is this pattern, that life sucks order out of disorder, as Schrodinger says. So I love the exuberance of this. Physics, as amazing as Einstein and Schrodinger and so on are, they only explained the very big and the very small. The universe, the elementary principles, ordinary size stuff, which is our lives, the things people write poetry about, clouds, daffodils, waterfalls, and what happens in a cup of coffee when the cream goes in, these things are full of mystery. The actual, so I just find that really, I feel this exuberance, this thrill of like the actual medium of life, where life happens, is characterized by these chaotic structures. We can, again, our literal essentialist mindedness, may hypothesize about how things, work under clinically sealed, controlled circumstances. But that's not life. The actual circumstances of our lives, as full of mystery to us as the heavens were to the Greeks. What does that mean? I think it means it's full of poetry and mysterious in the sense of full of secrets. Each drip sets up the conditions for the next. The smallest variation blows prediction apart. That's what I mean. The mystery is like this attentiveness to fine variation. That's sort of what Borges is getting at in The Garden of the Forking Paths. It's like what I was trying to suggest with The Dancing Owl, is this fine attention to minute variation is a way of recognizing patterns and of reality in the flow of reality, and thereby, creating that reality. If you recognize that reality really is on this plane of unpredictable, sensitive to dependence to initial conditions, it makes a difference from assuming that literal mindedness, that there are all these things that behave necessarily according to the physical laws as dictated, but to recognize, no, nothing's dictated, nothing's predictable. Even our solar system is a chaotic system. You can discount that and say, that's one of those things that doesn't really apply to life, like the very big or the very small. But I think, the point of this science is really, as Stoppard here is indicating, liberating. It's liberating you to pay attention to, say, your experience of your accidental life matters, really matters. So this attitude of discounting, saying no, or retreating into this essentialist point of view that there is a kind of physical billiard ball causality that's dictating how everything happens. There's something self-destructive about that. It's a way of not paying attention to and valuing the actual reality of your own experience. It's retreating into a dogmatism, just like former dogmatisms of religion or whatnot. That's why he's saying we're so lucky to be alive now. When you push the numbers through the computer, you can see it on the screen. The future is disorder. A door like this has cracked open 5 or 6 times since we got up on our hind legs. It's the best possible time to be alive, when almost everything you thought you knew was wrong. To see this mystery as an experience of newfound abundance, new invitation to pay attention and value your life. The uniqueness of happening, and I'm saying all these poems are trying to remind us of in some way or another. I mean, isn't it ironic now that we have these non-fungible tokens? There's like this new appreciation on that level of economy to invest in the non-fungible, the radically particular. So we invent this convention that becomes very expensive, economically, cherished, and also environmentally very costly, in order to notice what's happening all the time anyway, is totally free. But this is, I think, a perfect symptom of our essentialist minds. It's like we have to codify it to give us a way of holding on to it, even at tremendous cost. Emily Dickinson's poem, I heard a fly buzz when I die, I feel like addresses this kind of essentialism or dogmatism in terms like the king assigning away, keeping a kind of ledger, non-fungible tokens, or kind of keeping a ledger. So the original function of writing was bookkeeping, just accounting. And it, again, as if we could keep an accounting of life. Emily Dickinson here is beautifully, I just love thinking about this, as surreal as this poem is, written, posthumously. I think it speaks to, again, that the surreality of reality, if looked at from this perspective of chaotic patterns. I heard a fly buzz when I die. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of a storm, betwixt the trances of the blast in Coleridge's Frost at Midnight. Again, making us aware of a different scale of experience. So the wind's blowing, then the wind stops, and then all of a sudden a different scale of attention is thrown into relief. The fractals are scaling phenomena. So you can never know, what's going to happen. But to notice something is to put it into a certain scale, a certain pattern of experience, or as Wallace Stevens says, a certain relation, the shape, the cloud, the shadow. So nothing's predictable, but we can, whenever anything happens, we put it into this a kind of formal pattern, and that hence the recurrence of these fractal shapes, regardless what scale. The point is not the essence of the learning, discovering the essence of the accident of whatever object of experience, but recognize the pattern at which the patterns in which all experience happens, putting it into one scale or another. So this is like awaiting that last onset, the revelation of the king, of some kind of reality of death, be witnessed. Everything I willed my keepsake signed away, what portion of me be assignable. So beautiful. And then it was there interposed a fly, with blue uncertain stumbling buzz between the light and me, and then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. She uses repetition there, like tomorrow a new walk will be a new walk. I could not see to see. She's using sight as a metaphor for blindness. She's inviting us to think, like the rest of these kind of surreal, what's a blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz? She, in this language, deconstructing as it does the prosaic, literal meanings of words and linear logic of syntax, is inviting us to bear witness to not the king, the onset, this essential reality of some kind or another, but the patterns of experience unfolding for us as we read. What does it mean to not see to see? How is it that we can even read that? Or these other words? She's making us bear witness to a reality thrown into relief when prosaic, literal-minded narrative falls apart. Speaking of snowflakes, I think Wallace Stevens' The Snowman works in a similar way. If you look at the syntax of the poem, it's about a kind of syllogism, a kind of logic, if-then statement. One must have a mind of winter. In order to do this, you have to have that. But again, it complicates this syllogistic logic to such a point that you become intensely aware of the struggle to read the poem and to fit this kind of logic together. And it, ends with another kind of like Zen koan, like to behold the nothing that is not there and the nothing that is. It's sort of like you go through all this logic to what is it for? What do we need a mind of winter for? In order to just bear witness to this bewildering formulation. But we see how that work is, again, like the ministry of frost, the formation of snowflakes, and creates a rich pattern of experience just through the dance, the performance of reading itself. That's why I don't like it when people use snowflake as in a pejorative sense. You're such a snowflake. That's not, we should revere snowflakes. It's like Thoreau's formulation, you can't kill time without injuring eternity. If you disparage snowflakes, it's not a healthy attitude. You should revere the minuscule and the unique, and I think that's what Stevens is. It's not just about the uniqueness of the snowflake. It's about how finely tuned your perception is of life in general. So you have to have this mind of winter in order not to think of misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves, which is the sound of the land, full of the same wind that is blowing in the same bare place. So he's like asking you to just try to think of this without anthropomorphizing. Think of the sound of the leaves. That's the sound of the land. Expand out, enrich your comprehension of, the complexity of the world. Then this final stanza, and it turns on the ambiguity of this word for. So it could either be a conjunction or a preposition. For, like, because, for, the reason is, or so is it explaining the rest of the poem, or is it a preposition for the listener, the hypothetical snowman here, but that's the crucial kind of ambiguity that we're talking about here. Is it just for you, or is it in some absolute sense, essential sense, a causal explanation? And what Wallace Stevens is showing here is that it amounts to the same thing. There's no explanation that matters objectively or essentially beyond the experience for the listener. Experience is always constructed around, an agent, an activity in an environment.